Deep in the Sonoran Desert, 70 miles southeast of Tucson, Arizona, a small crew of construction workers stumbled upon something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Beneath the sand and creosote bushes, they found a steel door. Not rusted, not ancient, perfectly sealed. And when they finally pried it open with crowbars and determination, they discovered a concrete shaft descending 140 feet straight down into absolute darkness. The air that rushed out smelled of diesel fuel and something else, something chemical and wrong. What they found at the bottom would remain classified for over 60 years. This wasn't just a bunker. This was a tomb designed to end the world, and there are 18 of them still buried beneath Arizona's desert floor, sealed but not destroyed, waiting in the darkness with their guidance systems intact and their launch codes locked in vaults that were never fully deactivated. And according to documents declassified just weeks ago in early 2026, at least 3 of these facilities show signs of recent activity that no one in the federal government can adequately explain. The story begins not in Arizona, but in the frozen logic of nuclear game theory. The year was 1960, and America's military strategists faced an impossible equation. The Soviet Union had missiles, lots of them. Missiles that could reach American cities in under 30 minutes. The solution, they decided, required building something so massive, so distributed, and so deeply buried that even a full-scale nuclear assault couldn't destroy our ability to strike back. They called it the Titan II Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Program, and it remains the largest construction project in American military history that most citizens have never heard of. Between 1961 and 1963, the United States government built 54 missile complexes across 3 states. Each facility was identical by design. Each one contained a single missile 9 stories tall, carrying a thermonuclear warhead with a yield of 9 megatons, 600 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Each complex cost over $25 million to construct in 1960s money, nearly $250 million in today's currency. The total program expenditure exceeded $3 billion, and every cent of it was hidden in budget line items labeled for agricultural infrastructure and highway maintenance. The scale was staggering. Each Titan II complex required excavating over 600,000 cubic feet of earth and rock. The silos themselves were reinforced concrete cylinders, 150 feet deep and 55 feet in diameter, designed to withstand a direct hit from a 1-megaton warhead detonating less than a mile away. The missiles sat suspended on massive shock absorbers, floating in their silos like prehistoric creatures preserved in amber. Connected to each silo by a network of underground tunnels was the Launch Control Center, a 3-level capsule buried even deeper than the missile itself, where 4-person crews would live for 24-hour shifts, their hands never more than seconds away from the keys that could end civilization. The government chose Arizona for 18 of these facilities because the desert offered perfect conditions: stable geology, minimal groundwater, remote locations far from population centers, and most importantly, bedrock hard enough to anchor the enormous weight of the missile and its protective silo. But there was something else about the Arizona sites that made them special, something that wouldn't become clear until decades later. The construction happened in absolute silence, hidden in plain sight across the American Southwest. The government purchased the land through shell companies with names like Desert Development Corporation and Southwest Agricultural Holdings. Local residents were told the projects were irrigation systems, part of the federal government's ambitious plan to transform desert scrubland into farmable acreage. The workers, brought in from out of state and housed in temporary camps miles from the construction sites, signed security agreements that threatened 20 years in federal prison for discussing what they built. They worked in rotating shifts, and no single crew saw the entire facility. The men who excavated the silos never met the men who installed the guidance computers. The electricians never spoke to the missile technicians. Even the concrete trucks that delivered the thousands of cubic yards of reinforced cement came from different suppliers on different schedules, none of them knowing what the others were building. The surface structures, when they were finally completed, looked deliberately mundane. A few small buildings, some antenna towers, a chain-link fence marking the perimeter. Nothing that would draw attention from the air or from the sparse traffic on the desert highways. But beneath that innocuous surface lay something that still gives engineers nightmares when they study the declassified blueprints. The missile itself was a marvel of Cold War engineering and a monument to controlled apocalypse. The Titan II stood 103 feet tall and weighed over 300,000 pounds when fully fueled. Unlike earlier missile designs that use stable but slow-to-ignite solid fuel, the Titan II used a hypergolic liquid fuel combination, Aerozine 50 and nitrogen tetroxide. These chemicals were chosen for one specific property that made them simultaneously brilliant and terrifying. They ignited on contact with each other. No spark needed, no ignition sequence, just contact and instant combustion hot enough to melt steel. This meant the Titan II could launch in under 60 seconds from the moment the order was received, but it also meant the missiles sat in their silos filled with some of the most toxic and corrosive chemicals ever manufactured. Chemicals that would eat through rubber seals and steel valves, chemicals that created an atmosphere inside the silo that could kill a man in seconds if his protective suit failed. The crews who maintained these weapons lived with this reality every day. They would descend through the access portal, a small elevator that traveled down the shaft adjacent to the silo, and then walk through the underground tunnels to reach the launch control center. The walls sweated condensation in the Arizona heat. The air circulation systems hummed constantly, filtering and refiltering the atmosphere to remove any trace of fuel vapor that might have leaked from the seals around the missile. Red emergency lights cast everything in a hellish glow. And at the center of it all, suspended in its silo like a sleeping demon, the missile waited with its warhead armed and its coordinates locked on a city somewhere in the Soviet Union, where 2 million people went about their lives, unaware that their existence depended on a handful of launch officers in the Arizona desert maintaining the discipline not to turn their keys. Life for the crews in these facilities existed in a state of perpetual readiness for an act they desperately hoped would never be required. Each 4-person team consisted of a commander, a deputy commander, a missile combat crew commander, and a ballistic missile analyst technician. They worked 24-hour shifts in the underground capsule, monitoring telemetry, running system checks, and waiting for the red phone to ring. The Launch Control Center was a marvel of redundant systems and fail-safes. 2 launch keys, positioned far enough apart that no single person could reach both simultaneously. A safe containing authentication codes that changed daily. Communication systems connected directly to Strategic Air Command headquarters in Nebraska. And everywhere, checklists. Checklists for routine operations, for emergency procedures, for system failures, for receiving launch orders, for authenticating those orders, for executing those orders. The psychological screening for these positions was extensive. The Air Force needed officers who could follow orders without hesitation, but who wouldn't crack under the pressure of holding that much destructive power at their fingertips. What they discovered, though, was that even the most stable individuals started to change after spending enough time in the capsule. Some reported hearing things in the tunnels between the control center and the silo. Sounds like distant machinery running when all systems showed inactive. Others reported smelling fuel vapors that detectors could never confirm. A few, in confidential post-service interviews only recently declassified, reported dreams so vivid and disturbing that they requested psychiatric evaluation and were quietly transferred out of the program. But there was a problem, one that the Air Force tried desperately to hide from the public and even from most of the military establishment. The Titan II missiles were killing their caretakers. In September 1980, at Damascus, Arkansas, a maintenance worker dropped a socket wrench while servicing the missile. The tool fell 70 feet down the silo and punctured the missile's fuel tank. Fuel vapor filled the silo, and despite evacuation procedures, the leak continued for 8 hours. Then the missile exploded, blowing the 750-ton concrete door off the silo and hurling it 200 feet through the air, killing 1 airman and injuring 21 others. The 9-megaton warhead was thrown 300 feet from the silo. It didn't detonate, but for several terrifying hours, No one knew if the impact had damaged the weapon's safety mechanisms. That was the incident that made the news. What didn't make the news were the other accidents, the smaller leaks, the maintenance workers who developed neurological symptoms after exposure to fuel vapors, the unexplained equipment failures that kept occurring across all 3 states where Titan II facilities operated. And in Arizona specifically, there were incidents that remain partially classified even now. Launch control crews reporting complete loss of communication with the surface, for periods ranging from minutes to hours, unexplained power fluctuations that cause guidance computers to activate independently, security sensors detecting movement in sealed sections of the facility where no movement should have been possible. The Titan II program was officially deactivated in 1987, part of arms reduction agreements with the Soviet Union, and a recognition that newer, safer missile systems made the aging Titans obsolete, or so the public story went. The deactivation process for the 54 facilities followed a specific protocol. The missiles were removed and either destroyed or converted for use as space launch vehicles. The fuel was drained and neutralized. The guidance computers were removed. Critical systems were disabled. The silos were partially filled with gravel and sealed. The surface structures were either demolished or turned over to civilian agencies for use as storage facilities or communication stations. The land itself was declared available for sale or lease. But here's what the declassified documents from 2026 reveal. The deactivation process was never completed at 7 of the 18 Arizona facilities. Budget cuts, jurisdictional disputes between military branches, and classified national security concerns resulted in a suspension of the final deactivation steps. These 7 facilities remain sealed but structurally intact, with some systems still powered by backup generators that were designed to run for decades. The locations of these 7 sites are known to the military, but their exact status, what equipment remains functional, what materials are still stored in the underground chambers, is unclear even to current Department of Defense officials. What happened to these abandoned complexes in the decades since official closure? Local legends tell strange stories. Hikers report finding ventilation shafts in remote desert locations, still expelling warm air that smells of machine oil and old concrete. Land surveyors discover property markers for government installations that don't appear on any current maps. In 2003, a wildlife biologist studying desert tortoise populations found one of the sealed access portals and reported it to federal authorities. The response was immediate and extreme. The area was declared a federal research zone, access was restricted, and the biologist was required to sign a non-disclosure agreement before being allowed to leave. What was still down there that required that level of security response 40 years after the missiles were supposedly removed? In 2015, a group of urban explorers using ground-penetrating radar claimed to have located 3 of the facilities and detected what appeared to be active electrical systems at least 80 feet underground. Their findings were posted online briefly before being removed following a visit from Department of Homeland Security agents. The explorers themselves refused to discuss the incident afterward, except for one cryptic statement: "Some of those places were never fully shut down, and somebody needs to explain why." The most disturbing evidence comes from the 2026 declassification itself. The documents reveal that between 2010 and 2024, at least 3 of the sealed Arizona facilities registered unexpected activity on monitoring systems that were never fully decommissioned. Seismic sensors detected vibrations consistent with machinery operation. Atmospheric sensors at ventilation points registered temperature fluctuations suggesting active climate control systems. And in one case, dated August 2022, a satellite thermal imaging sweep of southern Arizona detected a heat signature at the location of a supposedly abandoned complex that matched the profile of an operational underground facility. The official explanation in the declassified report is maintenance of structural integrity systems to prevent collapse and groundwater contamination. But former Titan II officers interviewed confidentially for a Defense Department oral history project tell a different story. They suggest that some of these facilities may have been repurposed for activities that remain classified, possibly related to weapons development, possibly related to continuity of government planning, possibly for purposes that even they weren't fully briefed on during their service. The 18 Titan II complexes in Arizona represent more than just relics of Cold War paranoia. They are monuments to a period in American history when the government built infrastructure designed to survive the end of the world, when billions of dollars and thousands of workers created a hidden network of facilities capable of ending human civilization, and when that power was buried deep enough that most citizens would never see it, never know it existed, never have to confront what their nation was prepared to do in their name. Today, most of these sites are forgotten, marked on some maps, ignored on others, slowly being reclaimed by the desert that was excavated to build them. But 7 of them, according to the latest available information, remain intact beneath the Arizona sand. Their massive concrete silos sit empty, but unbroken. Their tunnels stretch through bedrock, dark and silent. Their control centers wait in the deep earth with their terminals dark, but their power systems dormant rather than destroyed. And somewhere in federal archives, there are people who know exactly where these facilities are, what condition they're in, and why they were never fully decommissioned like the others. We only know about the ones they admitted to. 18 Titan II sites in Arizona, documented in official records, marked in declassified maps, acknowledged in military histories. But during the frantic construction period between 1961 and 1963, when thousands of workers moved through the southwest building these monuments to assured destruction, when concrete trucks ran day and night to remote desert locations, when excavation equipment disappeared into restricted areas and returned covered in a particular shade of red Arizona dust, how many other holes did they dig? How many other projects proceeded under even deeper classification? The Titan II program cost $3 billion and employed over 30,000 people at its peak. The accounting records were classified. The construction manifests were classified. The final facility count was classified until 1978, 15 years after the last missile went operational. What else might be buried out there in the desert, sealed and waiting, its purpose known only to a handful of officials with clearances so high they can never discuss what they know. The next time you drive through Arizona, past the saguaro cacti and the red rock formations and the endless empty spaces between small towns, remember that beneath your feet might lie a shaft 150 feet deep, leading to rooms where the air still circulates and the emergency lights still glow red, where launch keys sit in their slots and authentication codes rest in sealed safes, where the ghosts of Cold War certainty wait in the darkness for orders that will never come. Or maybe already came, and we just haven't heard about it yet.